Thank you for joining us. It is Wednesday. It is a creative conversation, and I am here with Devin Graham, who's the Fine Arts Coordinator at the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center, and Elena Stevenson, who is the Theater and Performing Arts Coordinator. Is that it? I don't know why yours isn't much different than Devin's. I don't know why I can't get it. It's 2 words. Okay. And then Leah Palmer, who is the Education Coordinator at the Johnson County Museum. And today we're going to be talking about their recent redlining field trip, which I'm super excited to learn more about. And so I'm just going to pass it off to Elena. Do you want to give us a little bit of background information on what it is and kind of what, the background of it?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the background scope of the project. But first, I'm wondering if those tuning in, if they know what redlining is. So Leah, do you want to give like a brief definition of what that means in relation to history?
Sure. It's fairly complicated, but if I had to sum it up, I would say that so back after the Great Depression, as the U.S. is trying to pull itself out of the Depression, and the FDR administration is rolling out all these things. They roll out the Federal Housing Authority, which we're all probably familiar with if you've ever bought a home. And they did this to promote home ownership. Home ownership was at an all-time low, and they thought it would boost the economy, which it did. But in the process of doing that, the federal government essentially is insuring home mortgages. And because they don't want to have a risky investment, right, they send out assessors to look at neighborhoods, particularly in metropolitan areas. So there's 239 cities that we can find these maps for. And they look at a number of factors and they designate neighborhoods in a 3-color system. So red being the least desirable, the most risky, blue, 4 colors, yellow, still kind of uncertain and somewhat risky or transitional. Blue neighborhoods are in pretty good state, larger homes, a few multifamily dwellings, but not too many. And then green properties would be, your Mission Hills, your really secure investments. And through this process, they basically redline neighborhoods. And they literally lined them in red. They designated them risky investments, and they set in motion a chain of events that really still has a legacy in our communities today. There is a lot more to it that I will spare you from right now, but if you ever want to talk about it, me or my coworkers in the museum are happy to give you more info.
So that's essentially where the name redlining comes from, right, Leah? That's where that term comes from, thinking about segregating different properties in the community. And that's kind of where we got the title of the project from. The conversations developing the project started in December of 2019. We were approached with an educator from Shawnee Mission North in the English department that wanted to take her students on a field trip to our building. And we've mentioned this before in creative conversations. Our building is really unique in that all under one roof, we have our Johnson County Museum, we have an art studio, we have a black box theater, we have rehearsal studios, we have all of this capacity for lots of creative synergy and things to happen in our building. And every once in a while, it makes sense for us to partner and work together on like a field trip experience. And this specific educator approached us and told us, hey, my students are reading a Raisin in the Sun. I would love to bring them here and have a kind of immersive field trip experience, incorporating all kinds of mediums. And as a team, we were all like, I think we can do that. I think we can have them make some visual art. I think we can do some scene study work with the play. I think we can get them engaged with the history of redlining in Kansas City. So we were really excited as a team to make this work. And we started the planning processes for it in December and January, and then COVID happened. So we were like, okay, we probably can't do this right now. And then in fall of 2020, it was still kind of in the peripheral of our minds, how can we still make this work? The educator that originally reached out to us was no longer in the junior class, in that department. So we had a new point of contact, Erin Rivers, who's the chair of the English department at Shawnee Mission North. And we reached out to her and she was really interested. in the possibility of leading her students through this immersive field trip experience. But then the question came up, can we really bring 252 high school juniors on an on-site field trip to our building? And as planning started, it became very apparent that we probably cannot bring 252 high school juniors on an on-site field trip to our building. So we had to kind of switch gears and think about how we were going to do this, for like how we could do this virtually and still have impact and still kind of have the scope of what we were trying to do. Devin or Leah, do you kind of want to talk about how the planning shifted and the crazy discussions we had trying to figure out how we were going to do this? Or I'm curious, like, your insight in that process, and if you want to talk a little bit about that. But
I'll let Leah chime into that planning stage, but I just want to emphasize that, like, this was 252 16, 17-year-olds that we were trying to figure out how in the world do we get all of this amazing information and this incredible experience to them during a global pandemic, when like half of them are virtual, some are hybrid. They may switch every like other day. I mean, who knows where we're going to be when this timeline comes up,
right,
in April, when we're finally able to actually execute this experience for them. So I just want to emphasize that, because that's the setting that we were dealing with, trying to navigate. How do we do this? So I'm going to let Leah chime in on just where that planning pivoted, if you will.
Sure. I'm actually trying to remember all of the steps or changes we took because of the world we find ourselves. It's so common that I just kind of remember the end product sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, how did we get here? I would say though that, like, we found like the real silver lining here, in that, sure, an ideal experience would have been in person, right? And we can do, for the museum perspective, we can do a museum tour on this topic in our sleep, right? We can look at some primary sources. You can do an art class, easy, right? But in order to do that with 250 juniors, it's going to be in any chaotic order, right? There's no natural flow, just because of logistics. So we're like, hey, in virtual, we can actually make this build in a really logical way to really allow them to build on their knowledge, like slowly and logically, and make those connections that we're really wanting so desperately for them to make. And so that turned out to be the real beauty of the program, doing it virtually, is that we could make that logical arch for them, or arc, excuse me. And so what we ended up doing was, they were reading Raisin in the Sun, right? It's a story of, well, I'll let Elena talk more about the story because it's a play, it's in her wheelhouse. But we started with that because they'd read it in class, and it allowed us to really just start with empathy, right? Like, let's build empathy for these characters and the situation that they find themselves in, and let's dig into the text. And then in the second portion, we could go to the museum and be like, let's step back and talk about all of the complicated kind of historical context that places this family in this place and time. And then we could end with the legacy, the long legacy of redlining and systematic racism, and where we found ourselves today, and then allow them in the last session to unpack that by creating a piece of artwork. And that was a really beautiful trajectory that we only could do virtually. And I loved that.
It gives me chills hearing you talk about the scaffolding, because that just excited me so much, because it really was this natural build, and seeing how the students responded to things, because I got to be the last. I was fortunate that everybody else had to figure out stuff, and I got to come in and be like, they already figured it out. Now I get to just do this piece in my wheelhouse. So thank you guys. But all of that to say, like, when we're talking about that we did this virtually, this means that we were seeing, which I'll let Elena dive into the chaos that was her transition week, because it was the shift from hybrid to like all this other stuff with the schools.
We found out like 2 weeks before.
Yeah. But when we're saying we did this virtually, it was us on WebEx, like speaking to these classrooms. So we had like computers set up so we could literally see the students at their desks, like listening or not listening, I don't know, to what we're talking to them about, while we're up on this big screen, but we can only see them like from this like angle. And then the virtual kids were amazing, but don't like to turn their screens on. And so like we opened up our virtual sessions for the kids who are all virtual by acknowledging that we love presenting to a bunch of gray boxes. But if anyone was willing to turn on their screen, we would love to see their faces. So it was just this really strange, unique experience from our end. It was this beautiful thing, this beautiful buildup to what these topics, these important and heavy topics that we were addressing. But it was just this bizarre, kind of almost otherworldly or Twilight Zone, like how we're talking to these, how are we getting this information to them in a good quality way. So, I mean, I feel like we could dive into what each of us did if Elena wants to start.
Yeah.
Where you went.
I think that's you both make some great points. Like obviously there's pros and cons to doing this on site versus doing this virtually, and we can probably go into that more in a little bit. But like you both said, the ability to have space between each discipline to really reflect on each component and each each theme or topic, to have space for these kids to really think on it, I think was the gift of the way of doing it this way. So we started out with the performing arts. So like Leah was saying, the kids were reading A Raisin in the Sun. And what's amazing about that play is it was the first, not just African-American woman, but the first African-American that was produced on Broadway. And so that is historical and impactful in itself. But it's about a family of the Youngers, and they have a dream, and they want to get out of the community they're in, and they want to have prosperity, and they want to be in a new neighborhood. And it kind of unpacks all the obstacles that they're met with trying to reach that dream. And we talked about, so the play opens up with a beautiful poem, like an excerpt of the poem from Langston Hughes, A Dream Deferred, where the title of the play comes from. Like, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it wrinkle? I might butcher it. Does it wrinkle in a raisin in the sun? And we talked about the different dreams each character had and what happened to these characters, again, starting with empathy, as more and more they're faced with these obstacles upon reaching their dream. And thinking about, again, like planning how you want to do it versus how it ends up. Like initially, we had 3 actors committed to this project, involved in the project, and 4 actors committed to this project. And getting 4 actors to be aligned to a school schedule is a challenge in itself. And I probably should add, I taught this lesson 14 times in 1 week. So if anything, too, thinking of empathy, so much empathy for educators in a pandemic, like trying to do virtual education and hybrid, and like just so much empathy for educators after this experience, even more than I had before. But we realized we had to film these scenes. So we brought the actors in on a staggered schedule, and we picked 3 scenes to film, one of which actually was removed from the original Broadway production. And that was intentional because we wanted to talk about why would a producer remove this scene. In this specific scene, a neighbor is visiting Mama, the female protagonist, and is telling her about a bombing that happened in the neighborhood they're trying to move into. And so that scene was intentionally removed from the original Broadway production. So we had actors perform that scene. We discussed with the youth. We had another scene between Mama and Walter. We had a scene we ended with a scene between Mr. Lindner and Walter, if you're familiar with the play. And that basically is a member of the Neighbors Association trying to bribe or convince the Black family of the Youngers not to move into the white neighborhood. So it's kind of setting the stage for all of these other topics we're going to unpack with these kids. And the actors involved, I should say, we had Elroy Hawkins, Allison Jones, Saya Jenks, and Shauna Downing, and they were incredible. We kind of presented it like a semi-formal stage reading, but a lot of the feedback that we got from the kids and the teachers is they loved like hearing the text brought to life. Like it's one thing to hear an audio recording in your classroom, like a dated audio recording. But it's another to see actors bring the text to life. And I think that really made an impact. And again, thinking about doing this virtually, like I would say, I really loved like the chat. Like in WebEx, similar to Zoom chat. Like kids responding in the chat actually was a really great way to facilitate discussion, like to affirm what they were saying. And so that was a way that we had discussion with the kids, was just in the chat. And then we also, every once in a while, a kid would unmute themselves and want to chime in and say something. And that was kind of a nice way to assess impact, I guess, with this experience. The week prior, before we go into talking to each bit, I had a kind of a serendipitous experience where I was leaving work on a Thursday, or it was right after we dropped all the art kids off. And I was leaving work on a Thursday, getting takeout at a Thai restaurant, and the delivery guy was a student at Shawnee Mission North. And he was like, "Hey, I recognize your face. Hey, this field trip thing's really cool." And I was like, "Hey, maybe this is like making some impact." And, you know, yeah, it's hard with virtual. It's one thing to be in the same room with somebody and you can kind of read their body language or how engaged they are. But when you have to do it with the barrier of a screen, that can have its own challenges. But I was happy to be the guinea pig and try it all out the first week. I'm happy with how it went in the performing arts realm, but I was also excited to see where it was going to take off. And with that, like I said, we ended with that scene between Lindner and Walter, and then we had the kids write a 10-line, 1 to 2 page scene, reimagining how they would have done that scene if they were in Lindner's shoes. And that was the performing arts component. And the following week, they got to work with the museum. So we'll let Leah.
That was us. This was perhaps the part, generally speaking, that the kids are the least interested in. They're like, cool, history, right? But you can't really argue that this isn't incredibly relevant to them, and it's not important to understand the history of redlining and the segregation of our communities. And so that was really our whole goal here, was to lay the foundation for them to understand how we got where we are today, and to understand that it's an intentional process. You couldn't really be left with any other impression when you really dig into this history. I think a lot of people, teens and adults, are like maybe vaguely aware kind of that this was somehow intentionally done. But when you look at the history, we find that most people really aren't aware of what this process looked like. And so that was our goal, was to kind of distill this in the most concise way possible, which is challenging, because it is challenging history. And we actually had to start our session by saying that, like, things you're going to hear are kind of disturbing. There are words in these documents that we would never use today. All of this is kind of upsetting history. And that makes it even more important. So we started by looking at some of the maps of the Chicago areas that they're referencing in the book, because these were real neighborhoods, neighborhoods that would have had these homeowner associations that Mr. Lindner, who's a fake character in the book, would have been part of. Families like the Youngers would have absolutely faced this exact same situation in Chicago, countless ones. But then pretty quickly be pivoted to talking about it in the communities that they're familiar with in the greater Kansas City area, because this explains how, for example, truce becomes the racial dividing line of Kansas City, and how Johnson County becomes so quickly such a flourishing but really homogenous community, right? And so we dig into all of that history, talk about how we designated these neighborhoods, talked about examples of each one's from what they're familiar with, from Mission Hills as a grain neighborhood to Brookside as a blue neighborhood, Hyde Park would be a yellow neighborhood, and 18th and Vine District would have been a red neighborhood. We talked about all the factors that went into designating these neighborhoods, different levels. Of course, one of the top one being the racial makeup of the people who lived there, and showed examples of those really disturbing federal policies that are guiding this. Federal policies that started as private practice of real estate agents and banks that become federal policy through the FHA. And then, you know, this trickle down effect of just all these implications that are very hard to undo. So we talk about what happened in white flight block busting, which is how entire neighborhoods are turned over from all white to all black neighborhoods in a few short years, even sometimes months, that really creates Kansas City as we see it today. And then, you know, as the students are probably starting to feel pretty dark about this history, we come forward to today. We did talk about the civil rights movement, some of the families here in Johnson County who resisted against this, like the Sowings, and who had to work very hard to move into Johnson County neighborhoods. And then we talk about how it ended pretty quickly after it begins. And yet we find ourselves today with real estate maps that don't really look much different than those redlining maps that were made in 1939. And then we compare all of the things that can follow from where you live. It's not just your housing, right? It's your access to healthcare and grocery stores and transportations and education and literally life. And we ended with a map that breaks down life expectancy by zip code. And you can see that if you're in Mission Hills, or east of Truce, you can expect a difference of up to 16 years of your life expectancy, right? Nothing really solidifies it more than that. So, you know, I mean, it's not an uplifting history, right? But it's incredibly important. And what I found fascinating about this was we started by asking who is aware of the history of redlining or what it is, and only a few hands went up, which of course is great, right? They have a lot of space to learn. And then at the end, we asked who was surprised by this, and almost no one said yes, because they see the impacts of it in their communities. And it's fascinating to me because when we ask the question of the older generation, even my generation and above, people are very surprised. They did not realize this was so intentional, and they're pretty shocked by the things they read that were in these racial restrictive covenants, for example, which are on many of our homes in Johnson County that explicitly say who can and cannot live there. These young folks were not surprised. Because they see it, and in some ways I think that shows how much progress we've made and how much more awareness there is. But it was also I didn't know exactly how I felt about it, because it was also a little sad, like, you know, that we aren't surprised, become accustomed to kind of living around these things and noticing structural inequalities all around us. And so I apologize, I got into that and I had a point there at the end.
No, that was beautiful. I think the point connects to Devin's component, honestly, is I guess the beauty of hope and putting the onus on the students. Like, how are you going to respond? One thing I wanted to mention as you're talking about that, it's so important to remember this history was not that long ago. Like this, when all of this happened, was not that long ago. It was 60 years ago, you know, which is really not that long. And I had a student that told me, and when we were discussing the Lindner and Walter scene, oh, my grandmother was like a victim of redlining, or like fell prey to the redlining system. And it really puts it in perspective. And even just this past summer with all the Black Lives Matter movements, like so many, and we talked about that too in the sessions, like this topic is still immensely relevant. And I think that's why we were all drawn to the field trip experience to begin with, like how we can connect text from 1959 to how it's still relevant today. And I think that's a good segue to like Devin's component in this and where we wanted to leave the kids. Yeah.
So by the time that I had my week, which is fine arts, these students had gone through the text and explored that empathy piece, and just really diving into Raisin in the Sun further in depth, and then navigated the history of redlining and what are these things and what does this mean, and again ending off with where this is today and the kind of eerie presence of it still kind of being there. And so fine arts opened up by, we opened up with a positionality statement. So when we opened up our field trip with them, the very first thing that either myself or our teaching artist, Kelly, who was a gem throughout the week, trading off sessions with me, opened up by saying is that I am a cisgender Caucasian female, and I realize that I am approaching this topic of redlining and systemic racism with an outside perspective, and that I'm aware of that. And I will tell you, just opening up with that tone and acknowledging that's who we are, and that I own the fact that I have not personally felt victim to some of these things we have talked about. I think that immediately, it's like that had taken just this like it's like all of their shoulders were like this, then all of a sudden it was like, okay. So we spoke about two artists, Kerry James Marshall, who's a living artist today, born in 1955, and is still making work today. He approaches his work with predominantly with figures who are, from a color theory perspective, so dark and black skin tones that they almost disappear into their backgrounds oftentimes. And so he addresses specifically the civil rights movement and celebrating Black culture through these different lenses. But again, he's approaching this systemic racism concept by emphasizing that we are not seen. And I'm trying to show that we are not seen. And then we also remember that, okay, because this is going to become relevant. We also spoke about artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, who was born in 1960. So theoretically, they'd be around the same age, but tragically passed away in 1988 because he created all this work. He started out very similar to Banksy with this figure called Samo. And so this Samo figure, who is like elusively graffitiing the sides of the walls in buildings in Brooklyn, became quickly in the late 70s, early 80s, this like, who is this Samo character? Like all at the like hot art scenes and things like that, until he finally came out that he was Samo. And this is when he's like 17. So this made this super relevant for these students because he was their age when all of this was kind of starting. And this character Samo that he was igniting these conversations of we don't need to be okay with the mundane or the way that things are right now. The status of where things are right now doesn't need to be that way just because it is. And so his artwork eventually evolved as he came out as, hey, I'm Jean-Michel Basquiat, I'm the Samo character. That he actually creates this really abstract expressionism work, which compared to Kerry James Marshall, who's very realistic in how he approaches things, at least by comparison. Jean-Michel Basquiat was approaching it with, hey, we're not seen, so see me, like, pay attention, I am here, we are here. And so these are two really amazing artists who have approached this same topic of systemic racism and how these things all apply to Raisin in the Sun and redlining in such totally, completely different ways, both acknowledging these same things in completely different approaches. And so all of this to say, these students got these art kits, which kudos to everybody here at the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center who helped us put these together, because we had to put together 252 bags of supplies and making sure they all have what they need and all this stuff. So it was just this amazing thing. And then we had to get them to the students. And so special thanks to Elena and Katie for helping drive, and Leah for helping load, and like just all these different things, right? So these art kits, after our quick presentation, because I could talk about these artists for hours, we stopped after like 15 minutes to give them about 30 minutes to create work of their own. And so we had them task them with, well, let me backtrack with what they had been given. So inside these art kits, there was just various forms of pattern paper, including African kente cloth inspired paper, which stems from Basquiat's incorporation of his Haitian and African heritage. And then we had like your basics like Sharpies and erasers and ruler, vinyl stickers, paint sticks, which is super fun. Highly recommend them to anyone and everyone because they dry quick and they don't go on walls. So they had all these like random materials, but the coolest part in these bags is that the museum was gracious enough to let us use copies of the 1939 redlining map and a copy of the Kansas City Metro today. And so these students were able to look at how similar these maps were and then actually use them in their art making process. And so when we had them do a mixed media collage, kind of exploring themselves, and how we tasked them with having to complete or include one of three things: that they needed to somehow either acknowledge, advocate, or take action and acknowledge, advocate, action. Those were the three terms that we were taking and applying to redlining, systemic racism, a raisin in the sun. And how do these things apply to you? We asked that each of them have some type of personal image either around them or accessible so that they could be thinking about that, you know, this is personal. I may or may not be sitting here listening to reading A Raisin in the Sun, listening to the discussion of this, hearing about redlining, and I may be sitting there thinking like, how is this relevant to me? And the fact is that it is. It's very much relevant because we are still seeing these ramifications today. You know, not only from the redlining, but the Black Lives Matter movement and all these things, that all this is relevant to us. Well, these students were allowed and given free range to make whatever they needed to make. And whatever they were feeling in these past few weeks leading up to this, that was what they were allowed to do. And one of my favorite things is always I'm not an artist, or am I allowed to do this? And it's always like, you are the artist, so you're allowed to do what you want. I'm not the one making this decision about this piece, you are. So that's always kind of a foreign thing for students, I think, because they're so used to being told like step 1, step 2, step 3. And so this was really intentionally meant for them to process all of this information. And let me tell you, the work that came out of this, I only got to see a few because they were literally like in a classroom and then running up to their screen saying like, look at my piece. And so it was this wonderful, wonderful thing, which I will tell you that Kelly and I were literally jumping up and down for each student who was willing to show us something, because that is the most fulfilling thing that as artists that we and teachers of art that we can experience, is show us what you've made. So gosh, everything that they were doing was just jaw-dropping incredible. It was like we saw students, there was one, he was creating a self-portrait that one of the eyes was the 1939 redlining map and the other one was today's redlining map, and then everything on either of these either side, and he had a literal red line, like a literal red line. And that everything on either side was this like history component, and how is this relevant to now? We had another student that she told us that the positionality statement stood out to her. She said, I hadn't thought about acknowledging where my role falls into all of this. And so her whole thing was coming from that angle. And then of course we had students who were incorporating, you know, Raisin in the Sun and just there's all these different elements, because this was so much information to dissect and to wrap our heads around, because it is a dark history. It's sad. I mean, it's got a, you know, it's got a lot to process. And then, you know, just A Raisin in the Sun is a lot to process. And then we're talking about throwing these two artists in there who are processing their own experiences with all of this. And so it was an amazing experience. I will say that, like, it was just a really amazing experience, because it was watching these students process these things, because it is so relevant to now and so relevant to them in a way that they were able to freely do that. There were no limitations, no, this is what you're making, no anything. It was purely up to them. And I think that there was just a lot of value out of that. And I do want to acknowledge too that this program was beautifully supported by the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission and Freedom Frontiers. And so that, with all the literal like 2 years with like COVID sprinkled in there, was what eventually made this beautiful thing. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
So quickly, just real quick, you've been talking about the 1930s map and the Kansas City map side by side. Leah, do you have those that you could share that we could just
Sure do.
Just so we get a visual of kind of.
I have more maps than you would ever want. Let's see if I can share this real quick. Okay, can you guys see that?
Give me a second. I can see it. Hold on. It's got like a 20-second lag on.
Okay.
On that, yeah, it's fine. They'll probably see it. So is that the.
Yes, this is, so we call them redlining maps. Their official term is residential security maps. Because remember, it's all about secure investments. And so you can see Johnson County down in the bottom, on my screen, the bottom left. And And then, so that green area there adjacent would be your Mission Hills area. You see the blue areas would be Brookside and some of Waldo, all those kind of yellow areas around the city would be kind of transitional neighborhoods. And those are the ones that often turned over into all Black neighborhoods. And then the redlined areas would be areas where you could not get a loan. And so the things that follow that are vast. And then let me show you another map here. So keep that in mind, those color systems. And here today is what is called a real estate topography map. And it's not much different. Even some of the colors they use are the same. If anything, it's gotten even more structured, and you see that that racial dividing line truce is become even more solidified through white flight and block busting efforts. And because I have you here, I'm just going to show you one more.
I don't
I
see
haven't
the
saw
second one.
the second one yet.
Huh? You haven't
I
seen
don't
the
I
second
haven't
one?
saw the second one yet, but
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to leave it up a minute. And let's see, you guys. I'll go ahead and go to the next one, and hopefully it comes up. So I'll just start flashing a couple up. Then the next one I'm going to show is economic hardship. And you're going to see the same.
I think we're still on the 1930s map.
It's just unfortunate. Let me close it all the way up.
Gotta love Zoom.
All right, I'm back. I figured it out. Let me do it one more time. You guys see that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a 2020 map.
Okay.
And its purpose is really the same. It's a real estate map. And the goal of this map is to determine which properties are more valuable, be some more secure investments. And it's in anything more, even more rigidly divided than the last one. So you can see the effects of redlining and these practices. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
It's just so wild how similar they are.
Yep.
Because that was like, I was just really thankful to you guys at the museum for letting us take some copies and be able to actually incorporate that into their art making process, because I think that's really what like took it next level, is they were able to like see these up close and think, you know, it's eerie how similar they are when they're really like next to each other. And so it was just another means of like emotionally processing all of it, because we also like don't tell this to museum folks, but we let them cut them up and stuff, and so it was just
Educational use.
it really was, but it was like, it was a literal processing of breaking those barriers. Like they actually went through that process and cut up these barriers. And so it just, you know, thank you guys for letting us do that, because it really did add like another layer to it, which was really cool.
And I should say, like, I spared you a lot. My coworker, Andrew Gustafson's, who should get all the kudos for this program, but couldn't join us. This is really his area of expertise. He found just this laundry list of maps that look very similar. So it could be your hospital locations and education levels and wealth distribution and access, delivery maps. These areas where you can get a delivery in Kansas City follows pretty closely. I mean, the list of things that are similar to this are long. We kind of stopped looking after a while. We had so many examples. So, and one thing I loved that you said, Devin, was about the two different artists, and just even the different ways that these two artists who may have had some similar backgrounds use their art. I feel like was the perfect way to end this, because this is the generation that has a chance to do something about this systemic racism and the structure of our communities that is exclusive. It's literally excluding people. And you see some efforts in recent years to deal with this, and there's no perfect answer. And a lot of those efforts don't get it totally right. and do some things wrong or create some problems in the process. So everything from reparations to neighborhood programs to housing grants and everything and the like, but that we have to start to grapple with this. And there are so many ways that we can address this issue, even including art, right? And that they're the generation that I really think can do something about it. And I don't know what that something is, but at least we're starting the conversation, which is the first step.
Yep.
Right. And I think, as, you know, like Devin said, as a white cisgender female, you know, and being part of the Arts Council, you know, we may be able to give that platform, but we're not the ones that need to be telling people how to make that change, because it doesn't affect us personally. All we can do is advocate and acknowledge, and like Devin said. So I think that's super important, and I'm really grateful that you guys, you know, started that platform for those students. I don't know why I'm tearing up right now.
Because it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, that's the thing. Like, this is like this topic actually came up when we did our Apocalypse Now panel. That, you know, we had asked the question at that point in time, just for sake of comparison, because it's kind of interesting how parallel it is. You know, was COVID-19 like the start to an apocalypse? Like, is because by definition, an apocalypse is permanent change. That's what the literal definition is. And so it was talking about, you know, just all these things that have shifted, and Black Lives Matter came up toward the kind of laced in there, in part because the exhibition that was tied to, as people were processing the pandemic, there was this explosion of Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, the things that we had talked about in this Apocalypse Now is that, like, this has been going on. This is not
Right.
it's that there's not been to the same degree acknowledgement and awareness and advocacy that, like, hey, this is happening, this is valid, like these are all like things that we should be talking about. Because I'll echo what Leah said, that if anyone's going to change this, it's this generation. And I commend Shawnee Mission North and the English department there and that team for not only reading A Raisin in the Sun. Okay, that alone is huge, because when I was in high school, it was all white male authors. Like, that was what we did, and that was normal at that point in time. So I commend them for even reading this literature, because it's so important. But then to be open to these in-depth conversations and applying that literature to empathy and history, and what can we do about now, like just their willingness to allow us the opportunity to do that, because these are emotional topics. They're deeply emotional topics that need to be addressed. They need to be talked about and given that platform to do so.
Should we talk about how the Johnson County Museum is going to do a redlining exhibit in 2022? Just thinking about moving forward and keeping that momentum going of these conversations and trying to keep impact going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 2022, for the whole year, we will have a temporary exhibit up, title pending, but it will have to do with this topic of redlining, the history, the legacy, and how it impacted people in our community and in Kansas City in general. And not just that, we're going to build a whole programming initiative out of it. So there was conversations with lots of other stakeholders in the greater Kansas City area, other cultural institutions and organizations that deal with this topic or have some ability to weigh in on this. And there'll be a lot of community conversations and programming. And so it's just going to be the perfect momentum to keep this going, and the perfect reason to do this field trip again in person next year, in person, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And thank you for acknowledging our grant supporters too, Kansas Creative Arts Industry Commissions and Freedom Frontiers, because it's important to acknowledge, you know, when you're partnering with educators, funding is always, funding is difficult for us here for things, funding is difficult for educators, and grant support is huge in that too. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry.
No, that's great. I think that's
I guess acknowledging that there's a price to this too, right? Like acknowledge that the cost and all of that.
right. It's part of giving that platform too,
Right.
Yeah. And it's great that they're willing to partner on things like this. Sorry, my cat just climbed into my lap. Does anybody have any other points that you want to make that we haven't talked about yet? Or I know we kind of talked about the future of the project would ideally be in person. So, you probably wouldn't do it virtual again, or what are your thoughts on that?
Leah, do you want to? Like,
I love in-person programs. Everyone knows that about me. We found the silver linings in this, and we're able to do something really, I think, really meaningful for these students. But in the end, coming to this space and experiencing it in person, there's no like complete substitute for. So I know I'll advocate for doing it in person just because we have a lot more options. Getting anyone to talk about these sorts of issues can be challenging. And so especially on a device, especially when you have like real screen fatigue, I can't imagine what these kids are going through being on the screen all day long. I think could facilitate some really rich discussions and all of that. But that said, if we need to do it virtual, we can.
Yeah,
I will also advocate for in-person because virtual was amazing in the sense that we got to have it go in this order that we wanted it to. But first of all teachers who have been teachers through any of this are saints. And additionally, our teachers are just like miracle workers, because we did this for this week, and trying to teach visual arts, we're actually making the art through a screen and not really knowing what they're getting out of it is just a really strange approach, because like we gave our presentation, of course, and that had its own layer of value to get them thinking and considering all of these things. But really for us, the art making is so much more the process and the purpose, because it's that process over product mentality. And under normal circumstances in person, we would be, walking around while they're working and commenting and saying, have you considered doing this? Or like, what's your thinking behind this? And continue to try to get them to think further, like what's the next step? How much deeper can we go with this? But virtually, we were just like available. And so I will say, just because this is humorous, Kelly and I are just sitting there like, does anyone need any help? Every 10 minutes, like, what do you need? Is anybody willing to show us anything? And it's like crickets.
Right.
And so like that's literally when people were showing us stuff, we were like on screen going, oh, thank you so much. Like, thank you. Like begging them to show us things, which is, I totally understand. Like that's such a private thing. Creating art can be such a private thing. But I will say, if we were in person, I think we could have continued to push them to think these things further, or consider other questions that, like, if we saw them going a certain direction with it, have you thought about how this applies to this topic or whatever it is? So I think it would just be a vastly different experience in person.
Mm-hmm.
I'd echo that too. I think, theater artists have had to really be innovative this past year, because live theater hasn't really existed in 2020. And though there's been some really innovative and exciting virtual programming in relation to theater, there's really nothing like live theater. And for kids to have the opportunity to come and it be accessible and to see bring the text to life and see actual scenes from the play in front of them, like live, there's really nothing like it. And even though the actors did a beautiful job in the scenes, and I'm happy with how the film scenes went, it's still not quite being in the same room as with the actors. And that being said too, one thing I think I missed from this, I would have loved for the actors to be there, for the students to ask the actors questions about their character development process, because I think that's a component that could have been really neat that we could potentially do in 2022. But one thing we lose with virtual is that space to really process in between. But it's almost like 2 full days of a lot of processing, maybe, or a full day. It's just a slightly different experience. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, I I've had you guys on here for almost an hour, so I'm gonna let you get back to your days. But thank you again for joining us on our creative conversation and being open and transparent about this redlining project and field trip. And I am very excited to see where it goes next. So with that, I will let you guys get back to your day.
Thank you, Allison.
Allison.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.